I got asked 10 questions about hair in the span of 1 week. I guarantee you at least 7 out of 10 of those questions would be about bond repair and bond building products. The first bond treatments launched in 2014 and they took the entire industry by storm. So much so that since then, it seems like every brand has now launched their own range of bond repair and bond building products, and everyone just can't seem to stop going on about them. But at the same time, a lot of us still have a lot of questions. Because first of all, what the heck even are bond builders? Better yet, what are these bonds in our hair that they so desperately need to fix? How do they work? Do I need them? And if so, which one should I use? So consider this video some much needed team bonding. We're going to be clearing up all of these questions so that you know exactly if and how best to incorporate bond repair and bond care into your regimen for your particular hair type and hair needs. You ready? All right. Let's go. Bond repair is such an exciting topic, but it is also a pretty technical and layered one. So in addition to this video, I've done 3 things to help you move from knowledge to understanding to practical implementation, personalized practical implementation for that matter, in the most stress-free and efficient way. I shared a link in the description box to a free online diagnostic tool that analyzes your hair history, routines, and exposure to key stressors in order to identify both the type and the depth of bond damage your hair is likely experiencing before giving you an overview of what ideal bond care should look like for you. And if you're somebody that prefers to take the guesswork out entirely, I've also created a full range of clear, scientifically sound tailored bond repair regimen guides to match every single one of these damage categories. So regardless of your hair type or styling choices, you'll be able to find a bond care plan that's just right for you. I've designed each one to easily slot into and supercharge your wider hair care regimen, including step-by-step sample wash days, specific product recommendations, as well as a comprehensive list breaking down the top bond repair treatments that are currently on the market, building on the recommendations I'll be sharing in this video, of course. This way, you know exactly what they do, whether you need them, and what to expect in the event you ever wish to try them. So if I were you, I'd take a cheeky peek in the description box. Finally, for my further readers and rabbit holders who may be interested in diving a little deeper into the world of bond repair, I've shared a citation list of 10 papers I think you'd find very interesting. Alright guys, you know we don't like to waste too much time over here, so get comfy. We have a lot to talk about. Let the bonding begin. Let's start by addressing the reason we are all gathered here today. What are bond builders? To put it simply, bond building ingredients are essentially compounds that were engineered in order to form new bonds, reinforce existing bonds, or replace broken bonds in the hair that have been damaged in order to restore the strength and the structure that has been lost, thus making the hair look, feel, and behave healthier again. Well, at least temporarily until it wears off or until we do some more damage. And when it comes to bond repair products and the original intent behind them, it's safe to say that as the poster child, Olaplex still puts the O in OG. Their patented ingredient was designed specifically to replace the bonds between proteins that get damaged during the bleaching process, which causes the hair to be significantly weaker and more fragile, leading to the extensive breakage we historically associated with hair that has been bleached. Now, I'm not going to go into too much more detail about this because 1, I already covered it extensively in this video, and 2, clearly, despite being patented, Olaplex is not the only bond repair system out there. So let's get into all of the others, shall we? What compounds they're made of, how they work, and for whom, especially as many of these new generation bond builders were designed to address damage done to much more than just bleached or lifted hair. But in order to truly understand the full spectrum of what bond repair products do today, we first have to understand what these bonds even are within the context of hair structure and how that translates to how our hair behaves in real life. Then and only then can we understand how the things that we expose our hair to create the need for these bonds to be repaired in the first place. So I'm gonna need y'all to strap in and lock in for this explanation, and in return, I'm gonna do my best to keep my tongue brief, okay? Okay, so we already know the hair shaft is made up of 3 parts: the cuticle layer, the cortex, and the medulla. The cuticle, that's the outer protective layer, like shingles on a roof. We've heard this a million times. The only thing I'll add here is that it's not just 1 layer of shingles, it's about 8 layers of shingles, give or take. Then we have the cortex, which makes up the bulk of the hair shaft. And truth be told, you guys, this is where a lot of the magic happens, including the hair's long-term resilience, strength, and shape. And finally, the medulla. That's a little air vacuum in the center of the hair, but I'm not going to talk about that because honestly, it's irrelevant. Well, within the context of this video anyway. But seeing as the cortex is where the party is at, that's where I'm trying to be. So let's zoom in, shall we? Even more. Not quite. Now we're talking. And anyone who's wondering if we really had to get this granular, yes, we absolutely did. You all wanted to talk about bond building, well, we're talking about it. And when it comes to bond building, we're not just talking about surface level conditioning here. Yes, the effects of bond building on our hair are both visible and tangible, but the bonds that they repair exist on levels so molecular and so tiny that I couldn't even find a microscopic image of the hair structures at that level. That's how fundamental and foundational these bonds are to the structure and behavior of our hair. So here's everywhere these bonds exist in our hair, right from the atoms we can't see to the cuticle layer that we bruise and batter every single day. We start with single amino acids. Think of these as building blocks because that's exactly what they are, building blocks of the keratin protein our hair is ultimately made of. Now there are quite a few different ones, but by far the most abundant and the most important one you need to know is cysteine. Hold on to that. Now these individual amino acid building blocks are terribly drawn to each other and of course end up reacting with each other to form a long chain of multiple amino acids. This chain is essentially the backbone of hair keratin, and the links that hold the amino acids in this chain together is our very first bond, peptide bonds. Peptide bonds are permanent and by far the strongest and most fundamental bonds when it comes to the integrity of the hair's keratin protein. Because these bonds are the core structure that everything else in the hair structure is built on, if they're compromised, everything else is essentially like, cut the show.
I'm done. Take me off. Cut the show.
But when they are intact, they almost single-handedly carry the entire team on their backs, acting as the foundation of the core strength and structural integrity of the entire hair fiber. But the hair strand as we know it, not even close to being fully formed at this point. After this chain is formed, imagine it looks like a stretched out slinky. It gradually condenses into a helix or spiral shape. Now the force that pulls the chain into this shape, that force is called hydrogen bonds. Unlike peptide bonds, these bonds are temporary, much weaker, and dare I say, even more fickle than that one friend that we can never get to commit to plans. Too far? Fair enough. But the difference is, hydrogen bonds are actually like this by design. They contribute to our hair's elasticity and help us make temporary styling changes, like going from this to this, and then back to this. What happens next in the process of hair cortex formation is that two of these spirals then twist around each other to form one big mangled coily coil. This is called a dimer. Now you remember that the building blocks that made the chains that then turned into the spirals were made up of amino acids. You'll also remember that the most abundant amino acid in hair keratin is cysteine, the amino acid building block I told you to hold on to earlier. And so what happens when these spirals twist and fold on each other is that the cysteine amino acids in the chain end up being in super close proximity to each other. And let me tell you, when two of these cysteine amino acids get close enough to each other, oh, it's on site. The sulfur atoms that they each carry react with each other to form a new bond, the crowd favorite, a disulfide bond. Now, after a peptide bond, a disulfide bond, ciao. When it comes to upholding the integrity of your natural hair texture, rigidity, and long-term strength, disulfide bonds are all over that like white on rice. Now you will see how much of a mangled mess this coily coiled dimer is. So as much as we love a good disulfide bond, sometimes you just need a little extra something to hold you down, a little extra je ne sais quoi. And that's where ionic bonds come in. These bonds occur between positively and negatively charged amino acid chains, the same chains we discussed earlier. These are also known as salt bonds, and despite being temporary and comparatively weaker than peptide or disulfide bonds, these bonds still contribute to more than a third of our hair's dry strength and elasticity. Now when it comes to the formation of the hair's cortex, these structures basically continue to evolve and merge and multiply until the keratin protein that makes up the cortex as we know it is fully formed. Dimers merge with other dimers to form tetramers, which align with other tetramers to form protofibrils, and then microfibrils, and finally macrofibrils. Honestly, I think I'd be okay if I never have to hear the word fibrils again. But as much as I know you guys would just love to continue geeking out on the science behind hair strand formation, the most important thing for you to take away from this portion of the video is that throughout all these final stages of cortex formation that I've just casually glossed over, many, if not all of the bonds that I mentioned continue to show up again and again, and are crucial to not just the formation of these substructures within the hair, but also act as the glue that keeps it all together once the hair is fully formed. And speaking of glue that keeps everything together, there's one final type of bond I think is worth mentioning, and that bond is found only in the cuticle layer. In addition to peptide, hydrogen, disulfide, and ionic bonds, the cuticle also has lipid bonds. Well, technically it's a lipid layer, a fatty acid layer that's permanently bonded to the proteins on the outer surface of the cuticle. This fatty acid is called 18-methyl-eicosanoic acid, or 18-MEA for short, and it acts as the hair's first line of defense against damage and moisture loss. Practically speaking, the job of this layer is to reduce the hair's porosity by making it water repellent as well as reducing frizz, with the added bonus of shine and smoothness. So now that we understand what these bonds are and how they contribute to our hair's condition and behavior, let's get into all the fun little things that we do and experience that completely decimates these bonds. Fiber deterioration, or more simply put, hair damage, largely falls into 4 categories: chemical, thermal, mechanical, and environmental. Every single one of these can and often do compromise the bonds in our hair in some way, shape, or form. So if you suspect that any of this applies to you, the diagnostic quiz in the description box will give you a clear picture of the specific types of bond damage you might be dealing with and how to address it. It really will just make this whole process 10 times easier for you. And when it comes to peptide bonds, because these are very strong covalent bonds that underpin the entire hair structure, it does take quite a bit to disrupt, let alone destroy them. So here's what it would typically take to wear them down: extreme chemical damage, for example, higher levels of bleaching, strong relaxers or perms, excessive exposure to UV radiation, and of course very high levels of heat use, typically around and above 230 degrees Celsius or 450 degrees Fahrenheit. Caveat: for tightly curly or coily afro-textured hair, for reasons we just don't have the time to get into in this video, it's plausible that that temperature threshold could be even lower. So a safer threshold might be closer to 200 degrees Celsius or 390 degrees Fahrenheit. When these things break peptide bonds, well, that's the skeleton of your hair. Done. And given they also underpin the keratin protein the cuticle layer is made of, well, it's a wrap. When peptide bonds are significantly compromised, the hair is essentially going to look like a bowl of overcooked noodles. And in addition to being limp, mushy, or stretchy, it's going to have no elasticity or bounce back whatsoever. When you so much as breathe in its direction, guess what's going to happen? That's right, it's going to break. And forget about trying to get it to hold any sort of shape. Try to straighten it, it's not going to last. Try to revert the curls, it's not going to work. So if you take only one thing from this video, is that your ability to be able to sustain the fundamental integrity of your hair directly correlates with how well you care for your peptide bonds. Naturally, the best thing to do would be prevention, but thankfully, peptide bonds are very hard to break. But even if all else fails, there's always bond repair treatment, specifically ones that contain oligopeptides, like SH oligopeptide 78, which is a patented peptide bond repairer in the viral K18 products. It's worth noting here that ingredients capable of actually relinking peptide bonds are extremely rare. Last I checked, the best studied biomimetic keratin peptide with evidence of improving properties that are consistent with deeper level repair in damaged hair is the K18 peptide. And even this data is mostly supported by brand-sponsored studies, so do with that what you will. But keep this in mind when you see other products claiming to repair peptide bonds. Just because a formula contains amino acids or peptides or even other types of bond builders does not mean it can repair peptide bonds specifically. These bonds are the hardest to break, which means they are also the hardest to repair, and you'd be hard-pressed to find ingredients that have the molecular design required to do so. Now, for hydrogen bonds, being the weakest of all the bonds, it really doesn't take much to rattle these guys, and that checks out because, mind you, their primary duty is to help your hair shapeshift effectively. So small water, triggered. Matter of fact, forget water. Small humidity, triggered. And let's not even talk about high heat, because it doesn't even take all of that. Even just a little bit of warmth will do the trick. If you've ever made the rookie mistake of getting a silk press on a hot, humid day, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But even though these bonds break with just a bit of moisture or heat, they reform just as easily once the hair dries or cools, allowing the hair to either return to its original shape or set in whichever new style you put it in, until it gets wet again, of course. So when it comes to caring for hydrogen bonds, it's more a matter of fortifying and reinforcing than it is about repairing them, because as we've just established, they were designed to repeatedly break and reform naturally. Bond building ingredients like fiber hunts, for example, do this by introducing additional hydrogen bonds into the hair structure, and this strengthened numbers approach is what then makes the hair significantly more resistant to breakage from styling, heat, and environmental stresses before the damage can occur. Now, the ionic bonds responsible for our hair's dry strength and elasticity work somewhat similarly to hydrogen bonds in that they also break and reform easily. The key difference being it just takes a little bit of a stronger environmental change to destabilize them. And because the pH of hair and scalp sits around 4.5 to 5.5, it also tracks that this is the ideal range for the stability of those electric charges and thus ionic bonds. This means that any significant changes in pH, especially into the alkaline range, where pH levels go above 7, will disrupt that electrostatic charge and cause ionic bonds to break. And until the pH is neutralized and those bonds are reformed, the hair's strength and internal cohesion will be temporarily compromised. So here's a list of things that will break the ionic bonds in your hair and significantly compromise the strength of your hair until it's corrected. Coming out the gate strong with relaxers, especially the ones that contain lye, are by far the worst culprits, with a pH level somewhere between 12 and 14, which is why many prefer thiorelaxers that sit anywhere between 9 and 11. Still very high, so that's why the neutralizing step in relaxer processing should never never be skipped, and that's no lie. Next up, we have bleach or lightener, permanent color, other perms like curly perms, keratin straightening or Brazilian blowout treatments, both soap bars and baking soda, alkaline or hard water, chlorinated water, DIY clarifiers like clays and activated charcoal mixes, for example. And this is why the best way to use these will always be to mix them with an acidic liquid as opposed to just plain water. So if you do engage with any of these, it's always a good idea to involve a professional in the process who will make sure that your hair is properly neutralized, and then of course you can incorporate ionic bond care into your regimen. Here's what you're going to look for: products that contain acidifiers, so that would be ingredients like citric acid or malic acid, and an easy cheat code that you can use is to look for products that are labeled acidic bonding or pH balance. The Redken Acidic Bonding concentrate range is a good example of this. But what about the ever glorious disulfide bonds? As I said, after a peptide bond, these are definitely the next most important ones you want to pay attention to, because your hair's curl pattern, rigidity, and overall long-term strength quite literally depends on it. Like peptide bonds, disulfide bonds are strong covalent bonds that can only be broken by chemical treatments like perms, bleach, some hair coloring systems, very high heat, and interestingly, chlorinated water. Chlorine in pool water essentially oxidizes disulfide bonds in a similar way to bleaching and perming. It just does so less aggressively. Technically, chlorine doesn't snap disulfide bonds like bleaching or perming does. It simply just incapacitates them and destroys their ability to function as bonds. So yeah, just as techie. Add sun exposure into the mix and it's kamikaze for your disulfide bonds, because if there's one thing UV exposure is going to do, it's accelerate sulfur oxidation dramatically. So to anyone who's quite fond of applying lemon juice to their hair before spending their day by the pool, swimming and basking in the sun, I have to nominate your hair for this year's award for God's Strongest Soldier, because despite seemingly being the more natural way to lighten your hair, this approach can very well be considerably worse for your hair than just getting it done in a salon. Not only will this obliterate disulfide bonds, it will also wreak completely avoidable havoc on the lipid bonds that protect the integrity of your cuticle layer, all whilst also taking an axe to the hair's hydrogen and ionic bonds. So I implore you, don't do this, because your hair will get severely damaged and die. Don't do it standing up, don't do it lying down, just don't do it, okay?
Just don't do it, promise?
The more compromised disulfide bonds are, the more you can expect the hair to be porous and therefore more chronically dry. It will struggle to hold on to color or curl pattern. The cuticles will be much rougher and wear away much quicker, which will then cause the hair to tangle more and more easily. And of course, because the internal structural integrity has been compromised, the hair will be increasingly weak and brittle and eventually start breaking at the slightest attempt to manipulate it in any way. Bond-building ingredients that are optimized for cross-linking, like bisaminopropyl diglycol demaleate in Olaplex products, work extremely well to protect disulfide bonds from damage during chemical processes, as well as repair ones that might get broken after. And last but not least, lipid bonds. Honestly, for something that's supposed to be your hair's first point of defense, this layer gets compromised by almost everything, apart from water, chemical treatments, heat, UV exposure, chlorinated water, brushing, or any kind of friction. Heck, sometimes even just using a shampoo that's harsh enough will do the trick. And at this point, I'm pretty sure you don't need me to tell you what happens to the hair if and when the protective lipid coating over the cuticle layer deteriorates. It's basically a downward spiral that ultimately ends in breakage and tears. So the best way to help reinforce this layer is to incorporate products with ingredients like 18 MEA derivatives, ceramides, fatty acids, and cholesterol, all of which mimic and replace the lost natural lipid shield. And the Mizani Butter Blend Perfecting Cream Conditioner is a perfect example of this. With all of that said, it's important to note that whilst bond repair treatments are long-lasting and won't wash out instantly, it still requires regular maintenance in order to both sustain the benefits of the initial repair and prevent the accumulation of new damage. Now, even if you're someone like me who might be a little skeptical about clever marketing ploys to get repeat customers, the fact remains that the bonds these products create or repair are stable. Yes, but just like the original bonds in our hair were stable but couldn't withstand the foolishness, so they left.
So she left.
These two will also up and leave as the foolishness continues. And so that's why it can never just be a one and done thing.
Christina! Christina's gone.
And if you asked me for my personal opinion, I'd say I think bond builders are great. Not least of all because my hair is currently both bleached and singed. And a significant part of how I've been able to retain this much health and even retain more length than before it was being bleached and frequently straightened is because my regimen is absolutely riddled with bond builders. But given that they serve a very specific purpose, I wouldn't consider them an absolute necessity unless you are someone that falls into any of the categories of fiber deterioration mentioned in this video. Or to put it differently, the more these types of damage apply to you, the more beneficial and necessary bond repair products will be for your hair, and vice versa. If your regimen is simple and already optimizes for minimizing these forms of damage, i.e. your hair hasn't had any chemical treatments, you don't use much heat, if any at all, it's not constantly exposed to the sun or chlorinated water for extended periods of time, and it's maintained with very low manipulation, then bond care for you will likely be more about maintenance and prevention than about repair. At the same time, damage is still unavoidable and cumulative, so almost everyone can benefit from incorporating bond care into their regimen at some point, albeit to varying degrees. All of this is to say that whilst there is a lot of bond repair frenzy in the air at the moment, I'd encourage you to neither allow yourself to get overwhelmed by the amount of choices, nor convinced you need them all the time. In the guides, I've also grouped all of the top verified bond care products into clear categories based on the exact types of bonds they repair. So I truly believe that in conjunction with this video and the diagnostic quiz, those guys will help you navigate the space with a much clearer head. That's all from me, guys. As always, I hope this video helped to clear up a lot of your questions and left you feeling much more confident with regard to bond builders and bond repair products. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.